This is hands down one of the most disturbing cases we have ever covered on this show. The story of an 11-year-old girl who gave birth inside this home without running water or medical care, sexually abused by her stepfather. Now that girl may have been kept out of sight, but we have another verdict in this case involving the girl's mom. Here's video of her in court per KJRH television. Prosecutors alleged that the mom knew about the horror that was happening inside her home, and now we know what her punishment may be in this chilling case. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. How can something like this happen? That is a question that can be asked at every single layer of this case. How does a girl be kept out of sight of doctors and others who could have stepped in for so long? How does an 11-year-old give birth without medical care nearby? And how could her stepdad do something as horrific as he did in this case? And how could her mom do nothing? We will never probably get adequate answers to those questions, but we did learn what justice may look like for Cherie Walker, the mom of the 11-year-old girl who gave birth after being sexually abused by her husband, Dustin Walker. Dustin entered a blind plea last month to the charges he faced. Here's video of him making a court appearance per KJRH television in Tulsa. Now, before I go any further, again, I want to warn you, this is an incredibly disturbing story. Dustin, the man in his mid-30s, the stepfather, is the biological father of the 11-year-old's baby. He pleaded guilty to felony sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12 and 6 felony counts of child neglect. We'll talk more about his sentence in a moment, and we'll talk more about the trial that played out for Cherie. She did try to appeal to a jury that she was innocent, and she was charged with enabling child abuse and 6 counts of child neglect. Now, before I get into her trial that just wrapped up, I want to get you back up to speed on how this story came to light. So we need to go back to August 16th of 2025 inside this home in Muskogee, Oklahoma, rural part of Oklahoma. We're talking about an hour's drive from Tulsa. According to KWTW, who spoke to the DA who prosecuted this case, an 11-year-old girl gave birth to a full-term baby inside that house. Authorities say the 11-year-old hadn't seen a doctor in more than a year. She had to go through an entire pregnancy out of the sight of medical professionals. She also wasn't enrolled in school, so teachers weren't able to step in either. When law enforcement realized what happened and they were trying to piece together how it could happen, they talked to the girl's parents. So you have the girl's mom, Cherie Walker, and then you have her stepdad, Dustin Walker. Now, initially, the Walkers acted reportedly shocked that the girl gave birth, and they claimed they had no idea that the 11-year-old girl was pregnant. Now, the DA told local media that story didn't hold up. She described the girl as petite, and you think of this girl giving birth to a full-term baby. It was obvious in the most horrific of ways that this girl was pregnant, according to law enforcement. And you have Dustin Walker, who was 34 years old at the time of his arrest. Cherie Walker was 33 years old. Now, we found the Facebook pages for the Walkers. We found pictures showing them holding young children, neighbors telling local media in Tulsa that there were 6 children who lived in the house, along with multiple dogs and cats. And the conditions that have been described are horrific. Neighbors claim that the house with all of those people did not have running water for as long as 3 years, leading up to the uncovering of this, frankly, house of horror. Now, here is how the investigation went down to our understanding. Police have this 11-year-old girl who was given birth. You have a baby, and then you have the horrible conditions inside this house. And you have the Walkers who are claiming they don't know how any of this could happen. Now, at first, Dustin and Cherie were charged with 6 counts of neglect, 1 for each child who was living in the home. Now, the baby was then tested for DNA, and that is when this sad and sick case took a major step forward, because that DNA showed, reportedly with 99% certainty, that Dustin Walker was the father. A charge of sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12 was added to his case. Now, Cherie Walker was charged with enabling sexual abuse. Cherie did not appear to have a criminal record prior to this case, but Dustin did. We found 2 cases that involved Dustin Walker, one from 2020, where he was charged with firing a gun inside his home. That case appears to have ended in a fine, but records show that case then was sent to collections. Then in 2023, he was charged with domestic assault and battery in the presence of a minor. That case was dismissed. Clearly, the health and safety of the 11-year-old victim, the baby, and the other children who are living with the Walkers is incredibly important to focus on. In the wake of the Walkers' arrest, the district attorney said that the 11-year-old victim was traumatized, and I'm sure that's an understatement. This girl had given birth inside a home, reportedly without running water and without medical care. Now, not to mention that this girl had not seen a doctor in more than a year. She also wasn't in school. You think of those as places where there could have been adults that could have intervened and helped. Instead, this girl was allegedly kept out of sight. Now, one of the people accused of aiding the abuse and the horrific situation, not just Cherie Walker, Cherie Walker's mom. This is the victim's grandmother, and this is the newborn's great-grandmother, biologically. And the name of that woman is Michelle Justice. So on the day this story came to light, you had a reporter with KJRH television, and she's investigating this case after the arrests were made, and she's in the neighborhood where it happened trying to gather information for a story. She reported that a woman was taking videos of her from across the street. So she went and approached that woman on her way out of the neighborhood, and this is what the woman told her.
We didn't know this was happening. None of us.
How do you think your granddaughter got pregnant?
She keeps telling us that it was the little 12-year-old.
The woman you saw speaking there was Michelle Justice. And here is her mugshot. And according to law enforcement, what you just heard her say to that reporter was a complete lie. Justice was arrested and charged with 6 counts of child neglect. It is believed a total of 6 children lived in that house, including the 11-year-old who ended up giving birth. She reportedly also lived in the house where the child gave birth. In fact, she was accused of allegedly witnessing the birth. Michelle Justice is slated to go on trial July 23rd. Dustin Walker, he was the first one to receive a sentence. He entered a blind plea to the charges that he faced last month. So no plea deal in place for this. He was just entering guilty pleas to all the charges and then putting his future on the court. He was sentenced to life in prison. As for Dustin's wife, Cherie, the jury just found her guilty on all the charges she faced. This is video of her entering the courtroom per KJRH television. According to court records, her trial lasted a week, and the docket shows several first responders testifying. Testimony ended on the 17th, and that same day, the jury returned a verdict. Jurors recommended that Cherie serve the rest of her life in prison on each of the 6 counts that she was found guilty of. A pre-sentencing investigation will be conducted, and she is going to receive her sentence at a later date. Join us now to talk more about this case is criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. Just a brutal, brutal case for so many reasons each time we talk about it. I think of Cherie Walker, and she was faced with these neglect charges, but also enabling the alleged sexual abuse that led to this 11-year-old giving birth. How much, and there weren't cameras allowed in the courtroom, so it's hard to say, but just when you look at this case, I think of the fact that you had an 11-year-old girl who was full-term pregnant. The way the DA described the girl was petite, so it was obvious to a lot of people that this was not, that this was a girl who was actually pregnant, and yet Cherie Walker in the beginning said she had no idea how it happened. Like, just that fact itself, how might that have played into how quickly a jury decided that she was guilty of these charges?
I think one thing that this case hinged on, Chris, is the duty that the law imposes upon people who are charged with caring for children. A parent, that child is your responsibility. Their safety is your responsibility. You have to have an awareness as to what's going on with that child. And heavens, if you see your own 11-year-old child visibly pregnant, which it sounds like was indisputable just in terms of an observation, you have to further inquire. I believe that the law imposes that duty, and the jury found that Cherie Walker violated that duty, and now she's facing up to life in prison.
Yeah, and we can talk about the sentencing part of it here in just a moment and how that could play out. I also just think of, and it's just, it gives you goosebumps in a lot of ways when you just think about how terrible it is that this is a girl who went through childbirth at 11 years old and was pregnant full term. So you're talking, roughly, I think like 35 to 40 weeks pregnant, never saw a doctor. And I just think of like at that point, at any point in time, Cherie Walker, as the mom, could have gone forward to a doctor and brought something up. I mean, from perhaps the prosecutor's standpoint of how they played this, when you think of that timeline, like how does that factor into the argument that you're making in court that this is someone who potentially should spend the rest of her life in prison?
I think as the prosecutor, you touch on how many opportunities Cherie Walker had to take care of her daughter, to try to find safety, try to find help, medical assistance for her daughter. Look, the daughter is 11 years old. This daughter cannot, she doesn't have a car. She can't drive herself to the doctor's office. She needs help, and her care is entrusted to her parents, including her mother, Cherie Walker. How many instances were there where Cherie Walker could have driven the kid to a medical facility, sought help? That kid, I'm sure, was terrified and helpless, and Cherie Walker did nothing to help. And I think that was a tremendous problem for the defense.
Absolutely. And you look at Dustin Walker, who's the stepdad. DNA proved that he was the father of this child, which is just horrible. He is going to serve the rest of his life in prison. The recommendation from the jury, and I know every state is different, but this Oklahoma jury, the recommendation is for Cherie Walker to spend the rest of her life in prison. Typically in this process where there's a pre-sentencing investigation that's done now that the trial is over, what goes into that in trying to determine what her punishment should be?
Sure. So what the court is trying to figure out with the pre-sentence investigation in part is how culpable is this person? How morally blameworthy is Cherie Walker in terms of what happened? She wasn't the one who got her daughter pregnant, obviously, but what actions or inactions are attributable to Cherie Walker that gave rise to this. They're going to look at Cherie Walker's past. They're going to look at her history. Had she suffered any trauma? Had she suffered any abuse? What are the issues with which she was contending? On top of that, they're going to look at her criminal history, whether there is any indication of any other kind of wrongdoing. And then they're going to look at the egregiousness of the offense. The impact on the victim is going to be huge. The victim will likely be interviewed about that. And I'm sure that the judge will give that great weight in determining what sentence is appropriate.
As a defense attorney, and I know this is a very, very unique case, but what are you looking to do, even when the facts in this case and the jury very quickly decided that Cherie Walker was guilty? You don't have the facts on your side in a lot of ways, but like what is, I guess, for this defense attorney going into this, knowing that the recommendation is life in prison, like what is a win for a defense attorney who's representing Cherie Walker here?
I think at this juncture, defense really has to look into it. I'm sure they already have. What are the dynamics in the home? Was there any kind of coercion? Was there a power differential? Could there have been any sort of abuse on behalf of the stepdad, whereby Cherie Walker was the victim? That certainly wouldn't excuse her inaction. It wouldn't excuse her behavior, but it would provide fuller context in terms of what happened and why it happened. So you want to look at, hey, there was this other actor. He was the one who was directly involved in this girl getting pregnant. It's not as if Cherie Walker had direct involvement in that act. And so you look at, were there other players involved who are more blameworthy? Were there certain reasons that why Cherie Walker did what she did that might be understandable to a court, including that she was pressured or under duress or something like that? Defense has to look into that.
And when you have, you're going into that sentencing day, what's that like for a defense attorney, especially when you have a client who potentially could spend the rest of their life in prison? You saw Dustin Walker, and deservedly so, gets the rest of his life in prison. I guess, what's that like for a defense attorney? What kind of idea do you have going into this of how this potentially could go?
It is not just another day at the office. It's not just sort of like a routine thing. Anytime you have a client who is facing being put in a box for the rest of their life, it is an extremely grave matter. One thing I'm really thinking about is reading the room. Who is my audience? If we're going into sentencing, my audience is the judge. What are they like? What's important to them? How have they ruled in prior cases? What have they emphasized? What have they downplayed? How can I speak to what this judge cares about in a way that is tailored to my case, that is beneficial to my client? For example, if the judge handles perhaps perhaps a lot of domestic violence cases. And my client may have been the victim of that. I'm not saying that happened in this case, I'm just saying hypothetically.
Sure.
That's something you'd want to bring up because you want to be able to convey your client's position in a way that is not overly resistant or obstinate, and in a way that is appreciative of the gravity of the case, but also that serves your client and tries to get the best outcome.
And not only do you have this 11-year-old who's a victim, but their siblings also victims. There are these 5 charges of neglect in the house. Dustin Walker was found guilty of those as well. It was alleged that this house that they were living in Muskogee, Oklahoma, did not have running water. And one question I keep coming back to when I cover this is like, certainly for a lot of us, it's something we take for granted. If you live in a city, plumbing, running water and all of that, it's just not the reality for every person based on where they live in the country and what their economic status may be. With that said, at what point does a home go from, hey, we have tough economic situation to this is a neglect case? I mean, obviously there was a lot going on inside that house, but for someone who used to work as a prosecutor as well, like what are you looking for in a house, in a neglect case to reach that bar where you can charge someone for it like we saw here?
You're looking at whether there is a basic level of habitability, including for the children. Can they bathe themselves? Can they feed themselves? Are they exposed to harmful toxins just in their environment? Those things are really front of mind. And then on the flip side, you also should consider the defendant's capability. Are they capable of having running water? I don't know the specifics in this locale, but perhaps based on where a person might live remotely, they might not have access to that kind of thing. They might be destitute financially. This woman has 6 children. It sounds like the husband is not a great dude. And so does she really have any help? Does she have the ability to reach that minimum level of habitability? I think you sort of weigh the egregiousness of the situation with the moral blameworthiness or lack thereof of the people in charge of that home.
So you have 3 people who have been charged in this case. You have Dustin Walker, the stepfather. He's getting life. Cherie Walker could get life, who is the grandmother of this newborn. And then you have Michelle Justice, who is Cherie Walker's mom. And she is alleged to have been there when this child was born. She also, in a local television interview, pretty much lied to the reporter about what actually was going on and who she was in the house. The fact that you are now, if you're the prosecutor's office, 2 for 2 on this case, what does that mean potentially for Michelle Justice, knowing that those are the facts that have been alleged to this point?
You've got significant leverage going in there, Chris, because you've kind of teed this up. You have your predicate parts in place. Hey, we got the most bad actor, the person who caused the pregnancy. We have perhaps the second most bad actor, which is the woman who enabled it, who was the mother. And now we're going after the grandma. And so, they've got a pretty good winning record in terms of this case. On the flip side, defense is going to look at this and say, hey, maybe the grandma's involvement was much more attenuated. She may have had a lot less knowledge than the child's mother, things like that. And so there are potentially counterbalancing factors that need to be weighed in terms of the grandmother's criminal liability.
How much does the DNA test, even for the grandmother, factor into this? Because that was for Dustin Walker. He ends up doing this blind plea because it's like, how can you dispute DNA evidence that you're the father of this child? That was certainly a big part for Cherie Walker as well. How much, even now for the 3rd trial, does the indisputable fact that he is the father of this newborn, which is just unbelievable to even say, but how much does that DNA, if you're the prosecutor, kind of carry all the way through in giving you confidence you can get a conviction for a 3rd time?
When we're talking about severe neglect charges and similar child abuse charges, one thing that's going to be critical is when the grandmother knew about the results of the DNA test. Presumably it was after the pregnancy. And so, if she had that knowledge that there was something going on, of course, as the pregnancy was happening, that's a different culpability than if a person, finds out after the fact. But after the fact, you probably still have a duty, perhaps, to ensure that granddaughter has requisite medical care. And I don't know that the grandmother took any actions in furtherance of that. And so when did she know it? And what action did she take in response to that knowledge? May be really important information for the jury to have.
And then I just think of, how, you have 6 children, technically. I mean, you have 7 kids now, considering the newborn. I mean, what happens? Their mom, their dad, they're going to prison for a long time. The grandmother has been charged in this case. I don't think she's someone that people would look at and say, well, let's put the children in her care, just based off what the allegations are at this point. How does the state handle a situation like this? I mean, especially considering you have an 11-year-old, but then you also have a newborn as well.
For a lot of lucky folks, when circumstances are dire, you can lean on family. Unfortunately, these children cannot say that at all, that their family is going to be behind bars in terms of the adults who were supposed to take care of them. And what happens to them now? Certainly, they'll go into a kind of social services-like system, usually supervised by the government. But how likely is it that someone is going to want to adopt not only 6 children, but now a 7th, when the 7th child is probably an infant or a toddler at this juncture? What's the likelihood that someone's going to take that on? Even the biggest heroes might not have the capability to do that. I fear these children are going to get separated, and God knows what could happen to them after that.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next in this case. I mean, obviously, still determining Cherie Walker, what her sentence is going to be. Michelle Justice, she's innocent unless proven guilty, and then she will have her day in court as well, with the trial expected to start shortly. Just an awful story each time we talk about it. Criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis, always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Thanks for breaking this down for us.
Good to be with you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.